Today, let's break down the Fara 83 stats and more importantly, settle which attachments reduce its recoil the most. For the first part, I'll be doing a normal stat guide on the Fara 83. And for the second part, I'll be breaking down why I chose the recoil reduction attachments for this optimized build. And I won't just break them down, I will compare them to every single other combination that is viable for long range. I was still working on updating all the builds that I had when I got this comment. Normally I would make this into a Community Wednesday video, but since the new attachments were still new to me and I hadn't gotten to updating all my old builds, I decided to start with the Fara for Friday. And in the second part, you'll see where it stands amongst the lowest recoil versions of the Fara. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the Fara 83. The Fara 83 is a reasonably good fire rate, reasonable damage, but great recoil assault rifle, made for long range but still usable at closer ranges. So before we look at the stats, let's break down the optimized build. In this build, we're using the suppressor, the 18.7-inch Spetsnaz RPK barrel, the axial arms 3 times, the Spetsnaz grip, and the Spetsnaz 60-round magazine. Remember to hold any judgment and questions about why I chose these attachments until you've seen the second part of the video. However, I will say, if you just want to maximize your bullet velocity and don't care about your ADS speed or your perfect recoil, you can use the GRU suppressor, but you don't really need it, and you'll see why. So let's get into the stats, starting with mobility. Its ADS speed is 360 milliseconds, which isn't great, but pretty average for long-range Cold War assault rifles. Its reload speeds aren't the greatest at almost 4 and 3 seconds, so if you can, save at least one bullet before you reload. And its mag cap is 60, which is average for long-range assault rifles. Its movement and sprint speeds are absolutely great at 287.7 meters per minute and 378.2 meters per minute. If you're running a Psychov as a secondary, you're actually better off running around the map with this. Its ADS straight speed though is 1.48 meters per second, which is a little bit on the lower side, but it is again average for a long-range assault rifle. And its sprint out and tac sprint out times are at an average 260 and 360 milliseconds. Its stability is 1.5T, which is great and expected for a long-range assault rifle, but its velocity is 1025.6 meters per second. This isn't the greatest for a long-range build, but if you're used to an AMAX, this will actually be a bit better. However, this lower bullet velocity does come with a trade-off of better ADS time, and you'll see later, better recoil. And lastly, its rate of fire is 13.3 rounds per second, or 800 rounds per minute. This is really forgiving, although because it has great recoil, you won't be missing a lot of shots. So when we add up the numbers, we get a mobility score of 34. Now for its recoil, and look at it, it's amazing. As long as you can correct that tiny bit of movement in the beginning, you'll just be lasering anyone. And that's why it gets a recoil score of 50. Now for its damage. It has a drop-off point at 31 meters. In the first damage range, its headshot damage isn't the greatest, but its upper torso, lower torso, and limb damage are actually pretty good, and their TTKs do show that it is at least average, which is pretty unusual for a long-range assault rifle. In the second damage range though, its headshot damage still isn't the greatest, but its upper torso, lower torso, and limb damage, and their TTKs are absolutely great. The TTK on these three are extremely competitive, and it's part of the reason why it's so easy to use the Fara. So when we add up the values, we get a damage score of 60. And when we add up all the categories, we get a final score of 144. This puts it into category 2, meaning that it's very versatile and great to use. So how do you use this build? Pretty much like any other long-range assault rifle, only you'll be actually able to take people on at closer ranges if you're already aiming down your sights. Since the ADS time is pretty bad on this, I definitely would not recommend attempting to challenge an SMG at close quarters with it. So make sure you at least have a good sidearm before you enter a building. So is the Fara 83 overpowered? Well, it's got a score of 144, and let's just say that most long-range weapons have a score about 120. The Fara 83 will beat things like the Krig and the Grau, so yeah, it kind of is a little too good. And comparing the Fara to the Krig pre-patch, there was no reason to ever run the Krig over the Fara. I still haven't finished my testing and updating the Krig, so I won't say anything that is absolute right now, but it still looks like the Fara beats the Krig in almost every category. For the recoil that the Fara has, I would expect its long-range TTK to be closer to 800 milliseconds, not 700. And sure, its bullet velocity is a bit low, but at longer ranges, because of its non-existent recoil, it's really easy to lead your shots. So I wouldn't mind a slight nerf to the Fara 83, but I also wouldn't mind buffing the other long-range ARs. So now let's get into the more sciencey part of the episode, the recoil comparison. I tested 6 different builds. 4 with the Spetsnaz barrel, and 2 with the Liberator barrel. I included the builds with the Liberator barrel because I thought maybe its buff to bullet velocity would offset its lack of recoil control. So here is a build with the suppressor, Spetsnaz barrel, and Spetsnaz grip, suppressor, Spetsnaz barrel, and the speed grip, GRU suppressor, Liberator barrel, and the speed grip, GRU, Spetsnaz, and the speed grip, GRU, Spetsnaz, and Spetsnaz, and GRU, Liberator, and Spetsnaz grip. So this is what happens when you line them up from the worst vertical recoil to the best vertical recoil. We are counting pixels here and not the shape of the curve, so just focus on the height. You can see that the GRU, Liberator, and Spetsnaz actually gives us the most recoil reduction, which is a bit strange because the GRU, Spetsnaz with Spetsnaz should actually give us the most. And you can see that the worst one is the suppressor with the Spetsnaz and the Spetsnaz. So now let's look at horizontal recoil. Although I won't be looking at the bouncing from side to side because it's practically non-existent. So instead, we're gonna look at how much it moves from left to right or right to left. Because the more you have to correct going sideways is the less you can focus on just pulling straight down. So if we line them up once again, we can see that the suppressor with the Spetsnaz barrel and the speed grip gives us the worst amount of left to right deviation, and the best is the GRU with the Liberator and the Spetsnaz grip, which is weird because technically the Spetsnaz barrel with the speed grip should actually be giving us the most, since that's what it's supposed to do. So when we compare them all and add up the points, we can see that the GRU with the Liberator and the Spetsnaz grip actually gives us the best vertical and horizontal recoil. And the one that helps the least is the build with the suppressor, Spetsnaz barrel, and the speed grip. But this is Warzone science, and you know I'm not just gonna do this once. I'm gonna do this again and again. So let's go with recoil pattern comparison number 2. And because aiming sway actually affects your recoil, you can see that the rankings did get switched up. This time, the GRU, Spetsnaz, and speed grip got the best vertical recoil, and the worst was the suppressor with the Spetsnaz and the speed grip. Moving on to horizontal recoil, we can see that again it got switched up a bit. The best this time is the GRU suppressor with the Spetsnaz barrel and the speed grip, like it should be, and the worst was the GRU suppressor with the Liberator and the Spetsnaz grip. So when we add up the points, we can see that the GRU with the Spetsnaz barrel and the speed grip gives us the best vertical and horizontal recoil. And in last place, it's a tie between the GRU, Spetsnaz, and the GRU, Liberator, and Spetsnaz. So now let's go with the third vertical recoil comparison. In first place, it's the GRU with the Spetsnaz barrel and the Spetsnaz grip, as it should be, and in last place, it's the GRU with the Spetsnaz and the speed grip. For horizontal recoil, the best is the suppressor with the Spetsnaz barrel and the Spetsnaz grip, and in last place, it's the GRU with the Liberator and the Spetsnaz grip. So when we add up the points, it is a tie between the GRU, the Spetsnaz barrel and the Spetsnaz grip, and the suppressor with the Spetsnaz barrel and the Spetsnaz grip. And in last place, it's the GRU with the Spetsnaz barrel and the speed grip. So if we compare all of the stats, you can see that some of them are pretty consistent and some of them really aren't. But when we add them together, you see that the best combination is the suppressor with the Spetsnaz barrel and the Spetsnaz grip. And in last place, it's the suppressor with the Spetsnaz barrel and the speed grip. So if you only want vertical recoil control, then you should go with the GRU with the Liberator and the Spetsnaz grip. And the suppressor, Spetsnaz, and Spetsnaz combination does have the best horizontal recoil, but its vertical recoil reduction is good enough that it gives it the highest score overall. And trust me, vertical recoil is a lot easier to control than horizontal. But numbers don't really say much, so let's take a look at these results and show the pictures. With the 3 recoil patterns side by side, you can see that the numbers actually match up. And the same goes for horizontal, and especially here you can see why the suppressor Spetsnaz combination got such a high score. And here you can once again see that it does kind of earn its spot as the highest scoring one. So with all this information, I hope you now understand why I chose the set of attachments for my optimized build. The charts that you saw in the video and the recoil test were different tests that I actually did after this, and I just wanted to see if it was consistent, and yeah, it is. I definitely would have liked to do this with maybe 10 tries or 15 tries total, but it just would have taken way too much time. I needed to get this video out in days, not weeks. So that's the Fara 83. Do you think it's overpowered, and what do you think about the optimized build? Is the perfect recoil worth the less bullet velocity? Let me know in the comments. And if you want me to do a stat guide on your favorite weapon, or even rate one of your own builds, or just if you have any topic, question, or idea you want me to cover, let me know here or on Instagram, and you may see it on the next Community Wednesday. But that's the video. If you enjoyed it or has helped you in any way, let me know by leaving a like. If you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below. And if you want to make sure that you never miss another video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.